Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. It's your business to keep track of what those morons in Washington, D.C. are doing to destroy our country financially and to really have a multi-generational negative impact for decades to come. Daren Bakst, he's with a great organization called the Heritage Foundation, heritage.org. He's been monitoring what's happening with this farm bill that essentially it's really a food stamp bill. It's a welfare bill. And unfortunately, the way they intermingle these bills together, the way they get these things passed, they have a huge chunk there to help rural, voters, the farmers out there, which is now the backbone of the GOP. It's not red state versus blue state. It's really rural versus urban. If you look at the maps, the political maps out there. And then you've got, these food stamp bills, an increase of funding for food stamp, which I guess is now the backbone of the Democratic Party, creating a nasty, nasty result for the American people. Daren, welcome to the program. In spite of a GOP that claims to be committed to fiscal responsibility, they figured out how to pass the sleazy bill in the U.S. House under John Boehner. Talk about that, and welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here. Yeah, a few weeks ago, the House actually rejected a farm bill that combined that was really the food stamp bill.
Right.
So it's about $1 trillion bill. 80% of it, believe it or not, is food stamps. So that's why it's really the food stamp bill. And the House actually took some action last week that made a lot of sense, and that was to separate out food stamps from the agriculture part of the bill, so that you could have an agriculture-only farm bill, and then you'd have the food stamps bill. But they kind of missed the point of why you need to separate out the two. The point of separating out the two different sections is so that you can actually get a chance to actually reform the agriculture side of things and then the food stamps part of it. And last week, the House passed a agriculture-only farm bill, about $195 billion bill over 10 years. That's the projection. That is basically the same exact provisions that were included in the bill that was rejected a few weeks ago, and it's just there's really no reform. In fact, it might even make things worse. So it's very discouraging, to say the least.
Yeah, and the problem is that that's just another area that needs reform. Huey Long said, "Don't tax you, don't tax me. Tax the fellow behind the tree," and the corollary to that is don't cut you, don't cut me, cut the fellow behind the tree. And the Republicans are just as guilty of playing that game as the Democrats.
Yeah, they're, in some ways you can make the case that the GOP is certainly maybe more problematic when it comes to the agriculture side of things. This House bill that was passed last week would actually spend more on the most expensive farm program, which is crop insurance, than Obama would. It would actually increase the cost of crop insurance by $9 billion over 10 years, where Obama would actually have cut about $12 billion over 10 years. The House agriculture part, the House Ag bill, actually spends more than the Senate agriculture part of their bill. So it's just a fiscally irresponsible bill that the House passed last week.
Yeah, and of course, and it wasn't because of fiscal responsibility that Barack Obama wanted less. It's because of what I talked about, I guess, at the very beginning. There's not a whole lot of support for the Obama regime among farmers across the country. Yeah,
I don't know that Obama is, decided to be a fiscal conservative all of a sudden.
Exactly.
But when all is said and done, it's just we look at the actions, and we look at it, and Obama would have cut more. And the thing is that regardless, the point is that the crop insurance program is skyrocketing in cost. It's basically going to be about triple the cost over the last. It was about $3 billion a year, early part of the decade, like 2000, 2006, and it's going to be around $9 billion a year. So that's very expensive. So you think that you would actually want to cut costs, when in fact the Republicans were increasing costs. And I think most people kind of got the idea that, you need to cut those costs. The other problem is that the House bill adds new programs to farm policy. And it's one thing when you're trying to create a safety net for farmers to try to protect them from significant type of losses, but they create a new program that basically it's called a shallow loss program. And the idea is to protect farmers from even minor losses. So just basically ensuring that they have their revenues guaranteed. It's
totally eliminates risk, which is frankly how progress is made, how improvements are made, new technologies come to market, including ones for farming. Why bother developing those if we're guaranteed our income?
Well, that's exactly right, and that's the problem. Where is the innovation going to come from? You'll make, the farmers themselves will actually not take kind of risk. They won't be as innovative, as you said, but they also won't try to avoid risk as they should. They may take more risk taking and maybe develop crops that they shouldn't, in fact, grow, which doesn't do anybody any good. What it does, it ultimately distorts the market.
Yeah, that's all it does. That's all it does. Yeah, there's a great book. Golly, I can't remember the name. It didn't have to happen, I think, is the name of the book. And basically talks about, if it weren't for government distortions through subsidizing various things and betting on various horses, you wouldn't have booms and busts. Booms and busts and those type of things, those are government created.
Yeah, I mean, the Farm Bill generally is really kind of a central planner's dream. It is anybody who cares about free markets kind of nightmare. It is just all about central planning and trying to figure out what the price of certain commodities should be, how much of a particular product there should be in the marketplace, things that it's impossible to determine. It is just pure central planning. And, you have a lot of politicians out there that say they're in favor of free markets and limited government, but every 5 years or so they make an exception, and they made that exception for this Farm Bill. And that's what's happening again.
Were you surprised by some of the people who voted for this?
Yes, I was, and I also was surprised that they simply took what was the bad policy from a few weeks ago and just kind of packaged it together again last week. It didn't really make changes. In fact, it made some things worse. And they passed it. It's hard to know what's going through their minds. I'm not sure anybody would want to actually get inside those minds, but it was disappointing, certainly. So it's the good news was they separated out the food stamps from the farm programs, which is great. But the whole point of that was to actually, you got to get into the substance and actually reform those programs. It's not simply about just separation. That's a procedural issue, not a substantive issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's an article over at usdailyreview.com, and it particularly points out certain members, two freshman congressmen, David Joyce and Michael Grimm, who are particularly horrific in the amendment process. And then Jeff Denham, all of which were Republicans.
It should be noted that this bill was passed by all. It was all Republicans that supported the bill. All Democrats rejected the bill.
Yeah.
Now, not to give any kudos to the Democrats on that. Because the one thing that's important is that a lot of the Democrats came up to the floor of the House during the debate last week, trying to make it sound like it was the Republicans are trying to starve people because there's no food stamps in the bill. Well, of course there was no food stamps in the bill. It was an agriculture-only bill. So it's extremely misleading to say they don't care about, the hungry. Well, the food stamps will be considered in a separate bill. So that's misleading, and that's some spin that's been going around that I think is a disservice to the public.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The reason why I beat up on Republicans, I do beat up on Republicans, is because they actually can't claim to be for limited government and free enterprise and, those things that they campaign on. The Democrats have been pretty transparent about their socialistic intentions for a long time. Why have any expectations about the Democrats? The Republicans are allegedly in my family, and they're slapping us around like they don't care.
Yeah, this is when it does get a little discouraging, I have to admit. When you see people that are supposed to be free market oriented, limited government, vote for that bill. And quite honestly, even if you're not free market oriented or limited government oriented, even if you're just somewhat, you shouldn't have voted for that bill. It was unfortunately a very costly bill, and there are other programs like the sugar program that's worth mentioning that drive up prices to consumers. They hurt jobs because what happens is through the sugar program, which kind of distorts the marketplace for sugar. And by the way, we pay about double the price for sugar compared to the world sugar prices. Because it protects the sugar growing industry at the expense of the sugar manufacturing industry. And it winds up, so for every one sugar growing job that's saved, there's about 3 sugar manufacturing jobs that are lost. So it's not even good for employment. So it's just, there's a lot of different interests throughout the bill.
This is where you get your crony capitalism, when these arguments are being made that it somehow creates jobs, and the reality is it's actually destroying more than it creates. And then, one of the most heinous ones, in my opinion, is every single product out there now has corn syrup in it. Almost every single product out there. And that's because the government has all these subsidies to make corn syrup so cheap. How do you not put it in a product, which leads to the obesity, diabetes, and all the other problems we have?
And that's the problem. One of the things that is just so rampant with the Farm Bill generally is you have programs that are kind of that work counter to each other, they work against each other. That happens throughout the government, actually. So you might have, when you do have the Farm Bill and you have the food stamps that are part of it, you have programs that drive up the cost of food, which a lot of the Farm Bill does. Yet we have food stamps, which are trying to help people obtain food. So that's just an example of just how we have policies that just constantly are working against each other. And then with corn, with all kinds of the ethanol mandates, renewable fuel standards, just driving up the price of corn. And with the higher price of corn, the higher price of food. Yeah.
All right, the organization is called the Heritage Foundation, and so delighted to have here on the program from Heritage, Daren Bakst, and he is a research fellow in agriculture policy. Very depressing this month, I'm sure. Daren, thanks for spending time with us, though, nonetheless.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I want to encourage people to check out heritage.org. I check it out just about every single day. Great content, keeping me in the know. I'm Kevin Price. You're listening to The Price of Business.